Please be advised, Once Upon a Crime is a series depicting true crime incidents in South Africa. The content may not be suitable for sensitive listeners. Listener discretion is advised. The views and opinions expressed during Once Upon a Crime is not that of the SABC and Lotus FM.
On the 22nd of October 2011, the world was just about waking up to a new morning. The stillness of the night began to lift with the slow dawn of the sun. At 5:30 a.m. on Lever Road in Midrand, Gauteng, a Mercedes-Benz ML500 plowed straight into joggers Renilwe Lesinyoho, Galojwe Tlale, Margaret Mokoatsi, Given Mills, Nomvulo Domako, and Abigail Stengile. The joggers would not live to tell the story. They were killed that morning, all but Abigail Stengile, who sustained major injuries. These 6 friends were training for the Soweto Marathon. They decided to train together, jogging at an arm's length from each other, talking to each other, when the SUV struck them at a speed of no less than 113 kilometers per hour in a 60-kilometer driving zone. This is Once Upon a Crime. We're joined by expert Hestelle Van Staden, a forensic pathologist, to unpack this case. Thank you for joining us on Lotus FM. Let's jump straight into it.
The driver of the vehicle was a 44-year-old mechanical engineer named Sibusiso Langa, who was speeding when he hit this group of friends, causing their deaths. An eyewitness at the scene of the crime testified that he was walking to work that morning when he saw it all take place before his eyes. The vehicle approached the corner, and the driver could not control it. It drove straight at the people and drove into them and knocked them to the ground, is what he said. "I saw them being thrown in the air and dropping down," were his exact words. The witness immediately tried to call the police or an ambulance. The driver, Mr. Langa, however, got out of the vehicle and checked the front of it. The witness went on to say that Langa tried to start the car again, but it wouldn't start. A tow truck arrived, and he continued saying that Langa attempted to get into the tow truck, but the driver removed his keys. When the Joburg Metro Police arrived, Langa walked away, and the police chased after him in their vehicle. The officer at the scene said she drove in front of him to block his way. Upon questioning Langa, she asked why he drove into those runners, to which he had indicated that they had been in his way. Metro Police Officer Bongani Nkosi said he took Langa to a district surgeon in Hillbrow for a blood alcohol concentration test. Nkosi further said that Langa fell asleep while waiting for the district surgeon who was meant to draw the blood. You see, Sibusiso Langa, the driver of the vehicle, was under the influence whilst driving. There was also an alcoholic beverage bottle found in his vehicle. Langa's driver's license was immediately seized and he was released on bail of 80,000 rand when he appeared in court for the first time less than a week after the incident. His next court appearance was on the 11th of May 2012. He was charged with 5 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder and driving under the influence of alcohol. The trial eventually got underway in November of 2013. The only surviving victim of the accident, Abigail Stengile, was unable to recall what happened at the scene. She lost consciousness after being struck. In her testimony, she recounted that she only made the discovery that she'd been injured when she tried to get up off the road. She was actually still in crutches at the time of the trial after having sustained fractures to her legs. Of the victims, Given Mills was a passionate runner and was training for the Soweto Marathon. She had earned 53 medals, including one for the Comrades Marathon before. Given had adopted her younger sibling's child and held a business management and marketing degree. Renilwe Lesinyoho's younger sister testified in aggravation of sentence. She indicated that they had lost the breadwinner of the family. Renilwe was a chemical engineer working as a senior project manager at the time of her death, and she'd been supporting the child of a family member. Tlale's wife Komotso was 5 months pregnant with their second child when he died. He was an electrical engineer who was just promoted to director of the company he worked for. She lived close to the scene of his death and considered selling her home so she would not have to pass the scene every day. Nomvulu Damako's son would never know his mother. He was 22 months old when she died and had no recollection of her. She had an honours degree in IT. Margaret Mokwatsi's family said that she was also the breadwinner working as a specialist in information security at a bank.
Now, Hestelle, we see the initial charge here of murder and not culpable homicide. What is the difference between the two?
So culpable homicide is the unlawful and negligent killing of a human being, whereas murder is the unlawful and intentional killing of another human being. So a person who has caused the death of another in a road traffic accident is usually charged with culpable homicide and not with murder. However, in South Africa, intent has been extended in our legal system to include not only deliberate actions, but foreseen conduct as well, which we refer to as dolus eventualis. So that means the person does not aim for the unlawful act to occur, but he or she foresees that it could and continues with their action nonetheless. So this is what the state attempted to prove in this case. So they attempted to prove murder and not simply culpable homicide.
Can you tell us about your testimony and findings when you conducted the postmortem with the victims?
So I did the postmortem examination of two of the victims, of Miss Given Mills and Miss Margaret Mokwatsi. In the case of Miss Mills, what I found externally were basically lacerations and graze wounds. So lacerations are tears and graze wounds are basically what we call gravel rash. There were also open fractures of the left and right tibias and fibulas, and those are the bones in the lower part of the leg. And when we talk about an open fracture, we are actually talking about a fracture or broken bone where the bone pushes or breaks through the skin. So you can, if you look at the person, you can see the bone outside of the body. So I actually described the wounds to her right leg as causing nearly complete amputation. So it was very severe. There was also bruising of her scalp with a subarachnoid hemorrhage and a subdural hemorrhage. So those are hemorrhages that occur over the surface of the brain at different levels and is indicative of the head injury. She had a fracture of her fourth cervical or fourth neck vertebra with hemorrhage surrounding the spinal cord. So around the cord which runs from the brain to the rest of the body, there was hemorrhage. Her neck was basically broken. She also had a rib fracture with bruising of the intercostal spaces. So those are the spaces between the ribs. And then she had a liter of blood in her chest cavity, which is a massive amount. It's a massive amount to lose suddenly. Her left lung was also bruised, and there were features of inhalation of blood. So that tells us that she at least survived for a little bit. Her large bowel and the mesentery of the large bowel was also bruised. The mesentery is the portion of an attachment between the bowel and the back of the body. And then she had hemorrhage surrounding the right kidney, and she actually had lacerations, so tearing of the artery that supplies the right kidney with blood. So the cause of death in her case was multiple blunt force injuries. For Miss Mokwatsi, she also had a subarachnoid hemorrhage over the brain. She had interventricular hemorrhage, so that is hemorrhage in the spaces which are normally present in the brain matter. So there was hemorrhage in there. She had what we call pontomedullary rent, which is a tear in the brain stem, very dangerous injury. And she had a fracture dislocation of the atlanto-occipital joint. So that's the joint between the head and the neck. And it was not only fractured, it was dislocated. So also an incredibly severe injury. She also had a liter of blood in her chest cavity. She had multiple rib fractures. She also had tearing of the intercostal spaces in the chest. She had bruising of both of her lungs and features of inhalation of blood. So again, she survived for a little bit, although it would not have been long. Furthermore, her thoracic aorta, so the aorta is the blood vessel that carries blood from the heart to the rest of the body, that was completely transected. So it means it was cut off. And that would have led to death rapidly. She had bruising of the mesentery, again of the small bowel. Her liver was extensively torn. She had what we call comminuted fractures of the pelvis. So those are fractures where where a bone is not just broken into two pieces, but into multiple pieces. It's basically crushed. And then she had avulsion of the right kidney, which means that the kidney was basically torn off its blood supply. She also had transection of the spinal cord, so her spinal cord was cut through. And the cause of death in her case, again, was multiple blunt force injuries. So very, very severe injuries in both of these ladies.
Well, Dr. Van Staden, I find that really interesting that from your findings, you're able to determine whether they were still alive after the impact. Can you tell us, were you able to assign a speed to which Mr. Sibusiso Langa was driving? Was he speeding?
He was certainly speeding, as it was a 60-kilometer zone, but it's very difficult to actually assign a specific speed just looking at the forensic pathology. When I was asked what this speed was he was driving, was that it was consistent with a high velocity impact. And that was exactly what Doctors Holland and Mayhem, who had done the other 3 post-mortem examinations, had also said, but I'm not able to be any more exact than that.
So how was the vehicle speed eventually determined? Can you shed some light on that?
I actually found this very interesting as well. Ms. Wilna Badenhorst, who is an accident reconstruction expert, was called to come testify. And she had indicated that the vehicle was actually traveling up to 133 kilometers per hour in a 60 kilometers per hour zone. She then testified that she'd actually been very conservative in the calculations when she gave the opinion that the joggers had been hit at a speed of between 89 and 108 kilometers per hour. And her exact words were, the speed could actually have been higher, but I was conservative. What I found very interesting as well is that she said that the skid marks caused by Mr. Langa's vehicle was only present beyond the point of impact. And that implied that he only started braking after he collided with the joggers and not before.
I understand that there is a difference in testimony between Mr. Langa's testimony and that of the witness and the police. How did Sibusiso Langa's testimony differ from what the witness and the police testified?
Actually, it was quite a bit different from what the witnesses saw. He said that he had only consumed 1 glass of wine and 2 beers during the entire evening. So that's from around 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. in the morning. And he also testified that he did not think that he was impaired by the alcohol at all. So he said he returned home to the estate where he was living, and then he left at around 4:30 in the morning again because he was hungry. After he left the estate, he said that he saw people running in the road and on the right-hand side. They apparently then disappeared around a bend in the road, and it's at this bend where the accident then took place. He testified that when he approached the bend, he came across a vehicle coming from the front. And after he rounded the bend, he suddenly found people in the middle of the road. His words were, I tried to brake my car and I tried to swerve to the left. It all happened so quickly. Then the car collided with them and they were thrown to the right side of the road in his version. So he said that he was on the left-hand side of the road and the joggers were actually suddenly in his way. In fact, when Judge Bam asked him if he blamed the runners for the accident, he first denied it and then he said, yes, they were in my path. So he said that he had tried to identify any survivors, but he couldn't. And he also said that he never tried to leave the scene, instead saying that he was just walking away from the scene as people were verbally abusing him. And he denied speeding. He intimated that the evidence such as debris and paint flakes that were found could have been moved to the right-hand side of the road by people at the scene. But eventually all of this was proven to be false, and the judge actually accepted the testimony of the other witnesses and not that of Mr. Langa.
Was Langa eventually committed for his crime, and can you tell us what was his sentence?
He was actually found guilty on 5 charges of culpable homicide and not of murder. So the judge said that the state had failed to prove that Mr. Langa was guilty of the murder of the 5 deceased or of the attempted murder of Ms. Stinkile. He was, however, found to have been grossly negligent. So although he had foreseen that he could hit pedestrians, Judge Bam held that the state had not proven that he had reconciled him with the death of the pedestrians and that it also not intended to kill them. But he was found guilty of drunk driving. So Mr. Langa was eventually sentenced to 12 years imprisonment, And Judge Bun actually said in his judgment that true remorse would have aided Mr. Langa, and his driver's license was revoked. So thereafter, quite a protracted process followed where Mr. Langa tried to appeal his convictions and then his sentencing. And I must be quite honest that I'm not quite sure exactly when he started serving and how long he eventually served either.
Well, that's where we leave episode 2 of Once Upon a Crime. Thank you for joining us on this one. We will be back with a new episode next week. Stay tuned.